Well, hello again, students. Welcome back to Good Learners. I'm Safia Siddiqui, and now we're back with the second video for your chapter Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Now, in your last video, we spoke of socialism and the all over changes that were happening, whether they were ideological, social, or economic. Now, we begin by talking about the Russian Revolution. Yes, let's move forward. Now, we start by having a little background check about Russia. We should always remember that Russia was being ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. Now, during this time, it was an empire. Okay, so we're focusing on the Russian Empire right now, which included states like Finland, Latvia, Ukraine, Belarus, and some parts of Central Asia too. Now, the time that is in focus is 1914. And when we talk about the religion, the majority religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity. We also had Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Buddhists who were in the minority. We spoke of Russia's extent and religion. Now we'll talk about the economy and the industries during the Tsar's rule in Russia. So the main occupation was agriculture. Almost 85% of the population of Russia were involved in agriculture. And because it was the main occupation, the produce was used for export and for their own use too. Now, we know that all over Europe, industrialization was rapidly happening, and railways also held a major part in it. Let's talk about industrialization in Russia then. In Russia, factories were being set up in some places, and these industrial pockets were St. Petersburg and Moscow. So, which were these places? St. Petersburg and Moscow. During these time, factories were being set and railway lines were also being laid, due to which foreign investment increased. But there's always a drawback, right? So now, the workers' conditions were very bad. They were being made to work 15 hours a day and not being given efficient wages. In these industries, there were also 31% of women workers, and of course, they were being paid less than the men. Now, the situation here was that the industries were private properties owned by industrialists. Although it was owned by them, the government had little control over them, and the government conducted supervision to see if there were any malpractices. But rules were obviously broken, and the workers faced extensive working hours and very less wages. Now, amongst these workers too, there were social groups that were forming, and this hierarchy was on the basis of their skills. So these social groups created differences, but these workers often united to protest for their rights. So now we've spoken about the workers. Now let's talk about this another set of people, the peasants. The peasants were an interesting lot. They did not own any land, nor did they respect the Tsar. The other interesting fact is that they produced together and divided the profits among themselves. This made them natural socialists. And something very striking about them is that they were also people of free will. So they refused to pay the rent and also sometimes murdered a few landowners over rent. Yes, they were very interesting people. We've spoken about the different groups in Russia. Now we come to the very interesting part of the chapter. Here we talk about how socialism came in Russia and the revolts that followed. Now all political parties were illegal in Russia before 1914. During 1898, Russian Socialist Democratic Party was formed. Which party? Russian Socialist Democratic Party. Now, this party later got divided into Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks due to differences in ideologies, but we'll talk about it in the next slide. In 1900, Socialist Revolutionary Party was founded and they struggled for peasants' rights. Now, which party struggled for peasants' rights? The Socialist Revolutionary Party. Now, the Social Democrats did not agree with the Social Revolutionaries over peasants' rights. Why? Vladimir Lenin, who was a Bolshevik, which was earlier a part of the Russian Socialist Democratic Party, thought that peasants had a lot of differences amongst themselves, and so they cannot be the face of such a mass revolution. Now we'll see why. Now we know that the Russian Socialist Democratic Party got further divided into the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. Now here's a very simple distinction between them. Let's see. So the Bolsheviks were the majority party and the Mensheviks were the minority party. Bolsheviks was headed by Vladimir Lenin, whereas the Mensheviks were headed by Julius Markov. Now, the Bolsheviks wanted controlled and disciplined party members, They basically focused on the quality of the members that they had. And so now we know why Lenin did not want peasants to be at the forefront of the revolution. Okay, whereas the Mensheviks wanted a model of mass membership, the more the merrier. So now we talk about the 1905 revolution, which was the first revolt initiated by the people, and this led to other revolts further. So now when we talk about the conditions of Russia in 1904, they were very brutal. People were unhappy, there was inequality, the workers' conditions were really bad, and there was inflation too, which means the prices of the goods were rising up. Also, the real wages declined by 20%. So people did not have the money power to buy these goods. On the other side, the membership of workers' association rose dramatically. So people got enrolled into Social Democratic Party, Social Revolutionary Party. Basically, people got aware and wanted to fight for their rights. So now, Social Democrats, Social Revolutionaries, the peasants, the workers and the Jadidis came together and demanded a constitution. Now, who are these Jadidis? Jadidis were these Islamic reformers who brought about modern changes in Islam and wanted it to spread. Now, let's see what followed. Students, in Russian Revolution, we talk about this really important event, which was the Bloody Sunday. Now, why is it called so? Let's see. So, as we already know about the workers' conditions, 110,000 workers led by Father Gibbon went on a strike demanding better working conditions and appropriate wages. They marched towards the Winter Palace. Now Tsar got informed about this and he was naturally frightened. So he ordered police and the Cossacks to fight against the strikers. Now Cossacks are these police with horses. Over 100 workers got killed and 300 injured in this fighting. This happened on a Sunday in 1905 and so it is called the Bloody Sunday. Now this news spread all over Russia and people were enraged by this. They shut down universities and conducted strikes as a signal of dissent. Now parties came together and formed the Union of Unions and demanded a Constituent Assembly, which was a very simple request. Now let's see what followed. The demand for a Constituent Assembly or a parliament, which is also known as the Duma in Russia, was heard by the Tsar. So in 1905, the first Duma was created. Now Tsar being Tsar, put restrictions and declared the committees and unions as illegal. This again enraged the masses. He also dismissed the Duma within the first 75 days and then re-elected the second Duma and dissolved it too. He basically did not want people to question his authority. So he changed the voting laws too. Now finally he formed the third Duma and filled it with conservatives. Now conservatives were the people who aligned with Tsar and his thinking process. Conservatives की सोच Tsar के साथ काफी मिलती जुलती थी. So they did not ask any questions to him and this became very convenient for Tsar. Now all this happened from 1905 and continued long. Tsar was able to fool the public. Now when we talk about 1914, what really happened then? Yes, the First World War. Now like any other battle, there were two sides here too. The Central Powers with Austria, Germany and Turkey and the Allied Powers with Russia, France and Britain. So we know that Russia was an allied nation. Now initially, since Russia as a country was fighting the World War, people supported the Tsar. But then he refused to consult the main parties in the Duma and took decisions on his own. This raised the discontent among the public. Now there's also one interesting point here. The Tsarina or the Queen was a German and we were fighting against Germany. People already didn't like her. Now on top of that, this woman went ahead and renamed Russia's, the then capital St. Petersburg, to Petrograd, which was a German name. Now this increased the hatred amongst the public. Now students, let's see the conditions of Russia in the First World War. So as you can see in the slide, I've shown how the armies fought from the West and the East province. In the West, the armies fought from trenches or narrow tunnels, as you can see in this picture. They moved along eastern France. In the East province, the soldiers moved a great deal ahead, but there were large casualties too. A lot of army men died. Now, to summarize, the conditions due to war were really bad in Russia. Recurring defeats were demoralizing. The soldiers didn't want to fight anymore. there were 7 million victims of the war by 1917. Yes, 7 million. That's a huge amount. Now, the amount of people left back to work in the factories also decreased. So, the able-bodied men were sent to war, right? So, the shortage of laborers happened in Russia. That also became a problem. From 1914 to 1917, Russia lost against Germany and Austria. This was also very demoralizing for the soldiers. Now, very absurd thing happened wherein the Russian army, to prevent the attacks from the opposite army, started destroying their own buildings and started burning their own crops. This was quite absurd and led to the increase in the number of refugees. Now, let's move to the next slide. Now we'll see individually how the war affected the soldiers and the industries. So the impact of the war on the soldiers was huge. By 1917, there were 3 million refugees in Russia. Soldiers didn't want to fight anymore because they faced defeats repeatedly. There was also shortage of food due to less production and due to increase in refugees. This led to riots. There were riots reported outside bread shops too. Now let's see how it affected the industries. Now we know that it had a heavy impact. Shortage of labor happened in industries and industries started to break down due to this because all the men were sent to war. Then due to the war, the relations with other countries also worsened and so the supplies were cut. All the goods and the raw materials that came from other countries were cut. In 1916, the railways started to break down. Now we know how important railways were for industrialization, right? Now with all these conditions together, the hatred towards the ruler increased. A revolt was about to happen and honestly we cannot blame the masses for that. With this, we come to the end of the second video. If you like the content and the explanation, like, share and subscribe. Subscribe to Good Learners for more.